not intentional. Okay. So in this kind of next part, we'll be asking our public commenters, both from the manufacturer and the different patient organizations group, to speak to their comments. Each of these comments is going to be 5 minutes. You're going to have a timer on the screen, and I'm going to really ask you to stick to your 5 minutes. Otherwise, we will have to request that you stop at 5 minutes and conclude. And we're going to start with Dr. Stephen Dodge. Please introduce yourself, tell us your conflicts, and you have 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. And my camera's on. Can you see me?
We see you very well.
Great. So just by way of introduction, my name is Stephen Dodge. I work for Madrigal Pharmaceuticals. I'm responsible for our global medical affairs group. I guess my main conflict would be I do in fact work for one of the manufacturers. I work for Madrigal. So first of all, I want to, on behalf of my colleagues at Madrigal, I want to thank ICER for allowing us to participate in this value assessment. I'd also like to thank the patient advocates, clinicians, and researchers who have shared their perspectives during the review. As all of you appreciate, NASH is a leading cause of liver-related mortality and an increasing burden on healthcare systems globally. Madrigal's investigational medication, resmetirom, is a once-daily oral thyroid hormone receptor beta selective agonist designed specifically to treat underlying causes of NASH in the liver. Last year in 2022, Madrigal announced results from 2 phase 3 studies of resmetirom, the non-invasive MAESTRO-NAFLD-1 safety study and the MAESTRO-NASH biopsy study that you all have been discussing up to this point. Based on the positive results of these studies, Madrigal plans to file a new drug application with the FDA for resmetirom later this quarter. Earlier this month, resmetirom was granted breakthrough therapy designation from the FDA, a recognition that we believe reflects resmetirom's potential in the treatment of NASH as a serious life-threatening condition. The introduction of approved therapies will create an opportunity to improve disease education, evolve models of care, and establish principles for value assessment to support patient access and affordability. As such, ICER's review of resmetirom and obeticholic acid comes at a critical time for the NASH field. With that said, it's important to emphasize that the timing of this review did not allow Madrigal to provide detailed data from MAESTRO-NASH, our pivotal phase 3 study. The ICER process began before the top-line data from the study were announced, and we're still analyzing the data. We are committed to making our data available to ICER as soon as is practical. An important note we want to clarify is that even when we do provide our phase 3 data to ICER, some of the data that might be useful in the assessment will be unavailable because MAESTRO-NASH is an ongoing blinded outcomes trial, and we can't compromise the integrity of that study. We're committed to confirming the clinical benefit of resmetirom and have thus worked with the FDA to ensure that we do not impact this ongoing phase 3 study, while also working to complete our other phase 3 outcome study in compensated cirrhosis. Overall, we believe ICER's cost-effectiveness assessment of resmetirom used reasonable assumptions and inputs to account for the data that aren't yet available from MAESTRO-NASH. The evidence report will have utility for healthcare decision makers at the time of a potential resmetirom approval. Clearly, though, a cost-effectiveness model using the broader phase 3 data set, including patient-reported outcomes and detailed fibrosis progression data, would have greater utility, and Madrigal intends to continue to share MAESTRO-NASH data with ICER as it becomes available. Our public comment letter outlines Madrigal's perspective on themes, issues, and considerations that we believe should inform the evidence report. And instead of repeating those in detail, I'd like to share some broader forward-looking thoughts about our plans to introduce resmetirom in the US if approved. Our launch planning efforts focus on diagnosed patients with at-risk NASH and the specialist treaters who manage their care. We estimate that approximately 1 million patients with NASH have been diagnosed and ICD-10 coded in the US, and only a subset of these patients, those with at-risk NASH, would be initial candidates for resmetirom. So even though NASH is a prevalent disease, at launch, low diagnosis rate will limit the initial uptake and budget impact of new therapies like resmetirom. ICER's value assessment supports the cost effectiveness of resmetirom as a specialty medication, and Madrigal will take the ICER report into consideration as an important input into resmetirom price. Madrigal will not make a final decision on pricing until we have FDA approval. The introduction of the first medications for patients with at-risk NASH will set an important precedent in the field that is poised to surge with innovation over the next decade. At Madrigal, the impact of resmetirom, at Madrigal, we recognize and embrace our responsibility to improve NASH education, to continue studying the impact of resmetirom on long-term patient outcomes, and to launch resmetirom in a thoughtful, responsible manner that helps ensure appropriate patients are able to access and afford the medication if approved. Again, thank you on behalf of the Madrigal team.
Thank you, Dr. Dodge. We as the Midwest CEPAC, and I'm sure ICER, appreciate your commitment to collaboration and sharing data. I believe we can move to our next comment. Dr. Chris Gazing, please go ahead, introduce yourself, tell us about any conflicts, and you have 5 minutes.
Great, thanks. Hello, my name is Chris Gazing, and I'm a gastroenterologist who's the Senior Vice President of Medical Affairs at Intercept Pharmaceuticals, where I'm a full-time employee. Thank you very much for the opportunity to comment today. Intercept is dedicated to developing innovative treatments for progressive non-viral liver diseases with high unmet need. Non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, or NASH, is a serious, progressive, and life-threatening disease for which there are currently no approved therapies. The development and extent of liver fibrosis is the single strongest predictor of liver-specific and all-cause mortality in individuals living with NASH, and the risk increases as fibrosis progresses. Specifically, patients with advanced fibrosis are at the greatest risk of negative outcomes. Consequently, there is an urgent need for an antifibrotic treatment to prevent progression to cirrhosis and its many complications, including liver decompensation, liver transplant, and hepatocellular carcinoma, in order to reduce the significant resultant morbidity and mortality. Obeticholic acid, or OCA, is an FXR agonist being studied for the treatment of pre-cirrhotic liver fibrosis due to NASH. OCA directly targets fibrotic pathways as well as inflammatory and bile acid cytotoxic mechanisms associated with NASH and fibrosis development. OCA has demonstrated statistically significant and consistent antifibrotic efficacy in repeated analyses. The pre-specified interim analysis of the phase 3 Regenerate study at 18 months showed 23.1% of patients on OCA 25 milligrams experienced at least one stage fibrosis improvement without worsening of NASH, compared to 11.9% on placebo. This meaningful antifibrotic effect was recently confirmed in a second analysis using a consensus histology read methodology in line with recent US FDA guidance, where 22.4% of patients on OCA 25 milligrams achieved the regulatory endpoint versus 9.6% on placebo. Subgroup analyses by baseline fibrosis stage demonstrated consistent benefit, more pronounced in those with more advanced stage 3 disease. Improvements in non-invasive fibrosis measures and liver biochemistries were seen over time, including at 48 months among patients who had progressed that far in the study. Focusing only on fibrosis stage, again, the best predictor of liver outcomes, in patients with baseline and month 18 liver biopsies available, 37.3% of patients treated with OCA 25 milligrams improved at least one stage versus 19.8% of patients on placebo. The placebo group also had more patients worsen by at least one stage, 23.8% versus 17.6% on 25 milligrams of OCA. Improvements in fibrosis by FibroScan at month 18 were also greater on OCA versus placebo, even among patients remaining at the same F stage, suggesting possible benefits may exist beyond the full histologic stage improvement endpoint. This will ultimately be determined through the ongoing clinical outcomes portion of the REGENERATE study, which continues to collect events towards the final end of study primary endpoint, evaluating all-cause mortality and liver-related outcomes. REGENERATE also continues to accumulate safety data, but the safety profile of OCA and NASH is now well characterized through the currently available safety experience, with over 1,800 OCA-treated patients followed for up to 6 years, and a median exposure of over 3 years, making a total of over 5,000 patient years experience on OCA treatment. This safety experience is the largest in the NASH field to date, and we believe provides an informed characterization of the incidence, nature, and appropriate management of identified and potential risks with chronic OCA administration. One potential risk raised in the report is the increase in LDL seen with OCA. The modest increases that are seen peak 1 month after initiation and then consistently decrease over time until approximating baseline values by about 18 months. Importantly, the significant OCA safety experience available to date does not demonstrate excess cardiovascular risk. Regardless, NASH patients who typically have multiple cardiovascular and metabolic risk factors would likely benefit from treatment of their LDL and other metabolic parameters to appropriate evidence and guideline-based targets. In summary, we believe the strong and confirmed antifibrotic effect of OCA, as well as its robust safety profile, supports a positive benefit-risk profile for the treatment of patients with pre-cirrhotic liver fibrosis due to NASH. Thank you again for the opportunity to provide comments.
Thank you, Dr. Gassing, for being here and for your comments and collaboration. Dr. Rend, would you like to comment?
I just wanted to ask Dr. Gassing a question about the lipids, because we had trouble figuring this out. You said that the LDL levels peak at 1 month and then decline to baseline over 18 months. Does that occur in patients who are not treated with statins, as in the effects of the medication wane over 18 months? Or is it that counter therapy is instituted and then as a result they wane?
Yeah, so when lipid-lowering therapy is initiated, the numbers decrease much faster. They actually get back to normal within a year. In patients who don't start a statin, they also decrease, but it takes a longer period of time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, moving to comments from public comments. We have 5 different individuals. We're going to start with Mr. Michael Beadle.
Thank you very much. My name is Michael Battel, and I am the president and founder of the Fatty Liver Alliance. We are a registered charity that raises awareness about the risk, causes, and complications of fatty liver disease and helps those already diagnosed with NAFLD/NASH by advocating for access to approved treatments and care. Thank you, ICER and Midwest CEPAC, for the opportunity to speak today. I have no updates for my conflicts. It's a time of great hope for NAFLD/NASH patients, as 2 new drug treatments may soon become available, offering a lifeline to those struggling with these conditions. These drugs have the potential to transform the lives of millions of people, giving them the opportunity to regain their health and quality of life. My daughter Allison struggled with her weight throughout her adult life. She was diagnosed with NASH in her late 20s and tried but failed to impact her disease through diet and exercise in an attempt to lose the recommended 7 to 10% weight loss. 4 years ago, Allison, now in her early 30s, went to Magic Mountain, an amusement park in Los Angeles, with her husband. After waiting in a long line on a very hot day, she climbed onto a roller coaster and was devastated by what happened next. She could not close her seatbelt. She was mortified. In her words, "I have never been so humiliated, and I have never felt more terrible about myself than I did in that moment. That was a life-altering moment for me." Allison's 5'2", and at the time she weighed 256 pounds. After many consultations with her physicians, her decision was to have a gastric bypass. She lost half her body weight and eliminated her NASH But now she struggles with other health concerns, such as the need just a couple of weeks ago to remove her gallbladder due to the rapid weight loss she experienced. This week, she had to go to Emerge because of abdominal pain related to her gallbladder surgery and is now needing yet another surgery for related complications. Weight loss after gastric bypass is one option for NASH patients, as the ICER draft report comments, but it is certainly not an easy journey and not for everyone. These new pharmacological treatments represent a turning point in the fight against NASH as they address the root causes of these conditions rather than just managing the symptoms. They are the result of dedicated research, tireless advocacy, and a deep understanding of the unique challenges faced by patients. As someone who has personally lived through a NAFL diagnosis and self-treatment and witnessed the struggles faced by my daughter, Allison, I can personally attest to the significance of these new treatments. But even with these new drug treatments, it is crucial to remember that the journey to better health is still largely dependent on our own efforts. Medications are one very important piece of the puzzle, and with these pharmacological interventions, it's also important to note that a holistic approach that includes lifestyle changes, tailored care, and support from healthcare professionals is also essential. The availability of these new drug treatments marks an important milestone, but our work is far from over. We must continue to support one another, continue researching new treatment options, share patient triumphs and challenges, and work together to create a world where NAFLD and NASH patients can access the care they need and they deserve. The availability of these new drug treatments is an incredible breakthrough for NASH patients, offering hope and the possibility of a healthier future. By sharing our stories as we are today, by supporting one another, and by advocating for greater understanding and access to care, we can help ensure that these treatments reach those who need them most. As a NAFLD patient myself, a parent, and the founder of the Fatty Liver Alliance, I am committed to raising awareness and working alongside healthcare professionals, researchers, and fellow patients to promote better health outcomes for all. Let us celebrate the advancements made in the treatment of NAFLD and NASH, and also recognize the ongoing work that still needs to be done. By empowering patients, fostering collaboration, and driving research, we can continue to make a difference in the lives of those affected by these conditions. Together, we can overcome the challenges of living with NAFLD and NASH and create a brighter, healthier future for ourselves, healthier future, our loved ones, and the countless others who face similar battles. It is through our collective strength, determination, and compassion that we can create lasting change and improve the lives of millions worldwide. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Patel, for being here and for sharing a part of Allison's journey with everyone. We really, really appreciate it, and remind us that we're all doing this because to help our patients, and we appreciate also your comments to remind all of us about the importance of celebrating this moment in this field.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we're going to move to the next public commenter, Donna Cryer. Please introduce yourself and any conflicts, and you have 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to comment. To put my comments in context, I am Donna Cryer, a 28-year liver transplant recipient and CEO of the Global Liver Institute, which is the convener of the 80-member GLI NASH Council and the Liver Action Network of community-based organizations. GLI also conducted a successful externally led patient-focused drug development meeting for NASH. Additionally, I serve on the AASLD NASH Task Force and as reviewer of both the ACE and AASLD guidelines and AASLD guidance in NASH. In the brief time allotted, I will direct your attention to what I see as 6 fatal flaws in today's review. The first is that this review mischaracterizes this disease. There is no average NASH patient. NASH is a heterogeneous disease with current science beginning to characterize several major patient subgroups, including those whose disease is driven by metabolic conditions such as diabetes or genetic factors such as PNPLA3 gene found in many of Hispanic descent. The ICER model does not effectively capture this. This review mischaracterizes disease progression. NASH is a chronic progressive illness that is not a scientific debate. What is uncertain is who is a fast progressor, the rate of progression, and the relative contributory factors of various drivers or comorbidities in the disease progression of any one individual. Treatment effects cannot be uniformly applied regardless of stage. That would be an error. This review misinterprets placebo groups. The lack of overt symptoms in some patients does not mean that damage is not occurring at the same time. Many patients do not experience symptoms until their disease has caused years of damage and is finally caught at advanced stages, too often concurrent with a diagnosis of liver cancer. Also, the regression of disease in patients experiencing the high level of care in a clinical trial does not equate to spontaneous healing or an assumption that patients undergoing the wide range of activities under the umbrella of lifestyle management will achieve similar results. There really is no standard of care in a clinical trial, or frankly, we're still evolving it in clinical practice. Also, I would note that bariatric metabolic surgery is more effective than lifestyle management in resolving NASH. And so the NASH ICER model does not effectively capture this. Fourth, this review distorts the realities of clinical practice. There is a growing gap between the requirements for biopsy, a mode of diagnosis rife with risk, sampling errors, inter and intra-interpreter variability, and non-invasive diagnostics, which are increasingly used in everyday practice to diagnose and manage NASH. The ICER model admittedly does not effectively capture this. This review is mistimed. This review features the false forcing of two different medications with different mechanisms of actions, important differences in the study populations. There's been no head-to-head comparative effectiveness trials for these two treatment options. So phrases in the report, such as this drug is a less costly or more effective treatment choice from the healthcare system perspective, has no meaning. The consensus of the NASH medical and patient communities is the understanding that care will likely consist of multiple different medications with different mechanisms of action prescribed to the same patient to address the heterogeneity of disease and the potential for increased effect size. Throughout the ICER report and the response to comments, there are admissions of the flaws and limitations of the source material providing input into the model. The decision not to wait for outcome studies being conducted is an example. Many of the assumptions are hypothetical, not only just the price, but many are based on mixing US and EU data without acknowledging how different patient experience, healthcare practice, and cost structures are. From the shifting of perspectives, lumping together of differently defined patient cohorts, and many other factors, the ICER model for NASH is fatally flawed. And finally, ICER has misapplied their own grading system. Grades of C++ and I or PI are unnecessarily obtuse, arbitrary, and don't fit the facts. To assert that there is insufficient evidence by which to determine the net benefit of OCA when this drug has been researched in more than 1,000 NASH patients over 4 years, has a large safety database, is really incomprehensible. A properly applied grade would be B, a high certainty of small net health benefit. Currently, there are no FDA-approved treatments for NASH. This is the beginning of the pipeline, not the apotheosis of drug development in this space. Both medications successfully address fibrosis, which is the greatest predictor of morbidity and mortality, with side effects that the liver community understands how to manage. The voting questions are too facile and poorly constructed to convey any meaningful guidance to the field, so I will not address them. So in summary, I think that this has ended up creating more uncertainties and controversies than solving, and do not contribute to value to the discourse. Good day.
Thank you, Ms. Cryer. We appreciate you being here and appreciate your comments. I want to ask Dr. Rand, your hands up, please go ahead.
Sure. Obviously, Ms. Cryer has multiple concerns about our report, but I just wanted to address one that I think it's important to respond to, which is the suggestion that the correct rating for these medications is B. We think that there's a possibility that these medications are substantially better than that. And so by rating them B, we would be making a claim that they're not as good as we think the evidence suggests they might be. Let me finish, please.
Okay, sure.
So I think that would be a serious error. C++ includes the possibility of substantial benefit, whereas B does not. And so and PI also includes the possibility of substantial benefit, whereas B does not. So I would just encourage you not to push for a B rating for these therapies, because I think you may be undervaluing. Thank you.
If that is the case, I will surely entertain that amendment. I just think that the grading system is quite opaque and obtuse, and if someone as involved in the field has as much trouble assigning a grade based on the evidence that you've presented, then I would ask you perhaps to clarify that grading system. The most important point is that I
I
do feel there's a
apologize.
high certainty of a benefit for these drugs.
I'm so sorry. I have to interrupt because I want to make sure everybody has a chance to respond. But I will remind all of us that with the CEPAC comments, many comments highlighting lots of uncertainties that we all have about certain areas in the current evidence, and hoping this will help all of us find additional evidence. So we're going to go to our next public commenters. Okay. Tony Vigliotti, please go ahead. Again, introduce yourself, any conflicts, and you have 5 minutes. And I can't hear. Okay, I think you want to unmute. You appear as muted.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, go ahead. We can hear you now.
My name is Tony Vigliotti, and I'm a NASH liver transplant recipient, stemming from NASH, cirrhosis, and liver cancer. I'm also the founder of NASH Knowledge, a patient advocacy nonprofit. And my conflicts of interest are disclosed here. But I'm speaking today as a patient. Section 4 of the evidence report addresses long-term cost effectiveness. In order to evaluate the cost effectiveness of the two drugs under consideration, it is critical that every effort be made to accurately identify all benefits and assign a dollar value to them. I believe that no one would disagree with the assertion that the larger the benefit, the greater the tolerance is for the price of the drug. My comments will focus on the cost of advanced liver disease, which may be avoided by the use of the two drugs, and will address the disclosed inputs to the economic model. For this purpose, I've reviewed both the ICER evidence report and relevant cited reference materials. I have 4 comments. Table 4.6 of the revised evidence report provides non-drug cost inputs related to a number of the disease stages. The cited source of many of these inputs is an article entitled "The Real World Comorbidity Burden, Healthcare Utilization, and Cost of Non-Alcoholic Steatohepatitis Patients with Advanced Liver Disease." While it's not possible to tell exactly how the data from that article is used, I'm concerned that the study has 2 inherent limitations that makes it not a good fit for the ICER analysis, and severely underestimates the cost of advanced liver disease. This results in an artificially low net benefit for both drugs. The first limitation is that patients 65 years and older are excluded from the article's analysis. Ignoring the cost of that age group serves to significantly understate the costs associated with advanced liver disease. The 2016 study by Dr. Yanasi and others indicates that about 3/4 of the costs incurred in the United States for advanced liver disease are attributable to that 65 and older age group. Dr. Yanasi, of course, is widely recognized as one of the leading researchers in the field. The second flaw is that the article includes only patients with commercial private insurance. According to the Health Services and Resources Administration's 2020 data report, only about half of transplant recipients had commercial private insurance. So this excludes anybody on Medicare and Medicaid. The effect of these two items is that the cost analysis considers only a fraction of the affected population and is biased in favor of younger patients. The third observation is that the cost of a liver transplant seems to me to be understated. This was addressed in our earlier comments, but the cost of a liver transplant in a 2017 article by Dr. Yanasi is $355,000 in 2017 dollars. Even unadjusted to 2022 dollars, this is 50% higher than the cost used in the model and significantly higher than even the high value in the table. And finally, while there seems to be rigorous analysis for cardiovascular events, it is not clear to me that the cost of post-transplant kidney disease and post-transplant diabetes are fully accounted for in post-transplant costs. Those conditions are mentioned in the report verbiage. It is not clear they were accounted for in the economic analysis. The studies have shown that as many as 80% of transplant patients experience post-transplant kidney disease, and also another article states that about 30% have post-transplant diabetes. That concludes my comments. I'd like to thank ICER for this opportunity to express my views.
Again, thank you so much, Tony, for being here, sharing your comments. I'm going to ask if Dr. Sue, Rend, or Tice would like to respond, or if they have any comments before we move to the next speaker.
Sure. So I'll just say one comment about the liver transplant costs. It is definitely possible that the actual cost is higher than the parameter or the estimate that we used from the article that Anthony mentioned. However, it's the incremental cost effectiveness ratios would not really, while there may be, a higher cost would impact the total cost estimates that we found, it wouldn't really impact it would not impact the incremental cost effectiveness ratios by that much. And when we look at our sensitivity analyses, the liver transplant cost is not one of the top 10 most influential parameters as well.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Sue. We're going to go next to Fitzi Biliotti. Please go ahead, introduce yourself, and you have 5 minutes. Sorry, we can't hear you. Yeah, I'm so sorry. I see you talking and you're not muted, but we cannot hear you. Not sure. Sometimes it helps to just reconnect, but I leave that to the ICER staff to suggest solutions. And I do also know that we have, maybe we move Wayne, and then Bitsy, maybe meanwhile you can disconnect and reconnect, and maybe that will help. So let me ask if Wayne can hear me, Wayne Iskridge?
Yes, hi.
Perfect. Why don't you please introduce yourself and your conflicts, and you have 5 minutes.
Yes, I was diagnosed with liver disease in 2010 and cirrhosis in 2015. There, you just gave me a butt. I founded the Fatty Liver Foundation to support patients with NAFLD and its progressive stage of NASH. The foundation membership and our various support groups total about 20,000 patients. And I have no changes to my disclosures. I'm not a typical NASH patient. I've been managing my disease successfully with lifestyle and exercise. I do expect to need pharmaceutical support at some point, so the development of treatments is very important to me and my community in general. The historical standard of care was to ignore NAFLD-NASH until it became a late-stage disease. That dismissive view of early-stage NASH is perpetuated in your executive summary, where you made a point to state NASH is typically asymptomatic for most of its clinical course, and that course can be long. In many patients, NASH does not progress. The statement is true, but implies that asymptomatic disease is benign. It is not. The statement dismisses the very real morbidity associated with early stage NASH and minimizes the societal costs that should inform the cost-benefit analysis. It's important to recognize that the real risks of NASH, so to put it in perspective, F1 NASH is more hazardous than diabetes. F2 NASH is more hazardous than smoking. We care very much about diabetes and smoking, but early stage NASH is typically ignored. NASH is the progressive stage of NAFLD, and while the disease may not always progress in a clinical sense, it is always hazardous to patient health. Calculation of the effect of liver disease on lifespan is difficult, but CDC estimates that NAFLD costs us 2 to 3 years, and NASH dramatically cuts lifespan by 5 to 10 years. There are some who argue that the modest reduction in fibrosis that we see in these drugs is insufficient. There is a very important point here that is critical to understand. For a patient considering a first-in-class drug, a key benefit is to stop the progression. If a drug can just stop the slide into liver hell, it is of great value to us. The fact that both of these drugs have demonstrated a modest but real reduction in fibrosis prompts us to support them both moving forward. I believe the value of that effect is underappreciated in your evidence and cost-benefit analysis. The calculation of costs in your modeling is of concern. Your stated limit of not increasing the cost of healthcare necessarily limits patient access to treatment and is artificial. As a guidance document, that limitation makes the payer and policy folks sleep better, perhaps. But our society has mostly ignored liver disease for decades, and now we face the whirlwind. We estimate that there are in excess of 5 million people in America who currently have advanced fibrosis. You've used a more conservative number of 3.8 million with advanced fibrosis in your analysis. With the rapidly increasing incidence of the disease, we don't believe your analysis even holds the patient pool steady. The candidates for treatment will grow under your model, and planners will be badly served using this as their guide. I appreciate the challenge of doing a cost-benefit analysis when the cost of the drug is unknown. Because of the wide variance in the price estimates of these two candidates, I'm concerned that this report will have unintended consequences as the companies and agencies work through this. Everyone is concerned about finally dealing with the epidemic of non-communicable disease, but talking about it clearly is critical. A benchmark suggesting that it is a budget-neutral pathway serves no one. In terms of your rating system, we would rank the beta cholic acid as C+ and resmetirom as C++. Thank you.
Thank you, Wayne. Again, appreciate you being here, sharing your comments, and reminding us of the hope benefit that new medications bring to any field. I do see Dr. Rind's hand is up. Please go ahead.
Thanks. I'm not entirely sure, and I saw you tweeted this as well about the analysis suggesting that F1 disease is similar to the risk of diabetes. But if that's true, it would only be able to be true in terms of the cardiac risk, which is, of course, the major risk for many patients from NASH, bigger than the risk of liver progression. And there's no particular reason to think that reducing fibrosis would reduce the cardiac risks of NASH, as opposed to the therapies that do also reduce those risks. I'm wondering if our clinical experts might be able to comment, because again, I'm unaware of the equivalence that you talked about between those risk factors. We obviously think of both diabetes and smoking as extremely risky for coronary disease, but I was unaware that, for instance, F1 fibrosis was the equivalent there.
The rationale that I was making is not particularly cardiac, but in terms of mortality. And the study was done by Paul Angulo a couple of years ago.
Maybe Dr. Brandman can answer.
Yeah, so, the longitudinal studies really looking at what happens to fatty liver patients over time really shows that as the fibrosis stage increases, yes, we're seeing more liver-related events, but also we're seeing increases in cardiac events. And it really seems like there is kind of a dose response in terms of fibrosis and both liver and non-liver related events. But we think that one of the or two of the important confounding factors are probably age as well as diabetes. So I'm not aware of, stage 1 fibrosis in and of itself being kind of a predictor of cardiac events, but there's some data to show that NASH in and of itself does increase risk of cardiovascular disease. Definitely asymptomatic and perhaps symptomatic events.
The Angulo study calculated hazard ratios.
Okay, well, thank you for that clarification. I think we are gonna try to one more time with the Betsy and hope her mic is working now. Unfortunately, I still cannot hear Betsy, so I'm just going to announce that if we can get the mic to work, we can definitely share your written statement with the Midwest CEPAC and with publish that with the final report. You're giving me an indication to maybe wait for 1 more minute, but you're trying to figure it out. Okay, well, we have a couple more minutes, so I think I'm willing to just open it up if there are any responses or thoughts from the clinical experts or our patient experts in general. And I think after 1 minute, we might have just to, unfortunately, move on. Okay, I see at least one hand is up from Dr. Brandman. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's important to highlight really what we just heard from the patients and the patient advocates, because I think there's concern that the reports and the data that are coming out might actually hurt access to these drugs that are going to be really not the final step in fatty liver management, but I think the first step in drug management of fatty liver disease. So I do hope that what is taken away is that, these drugs really do show promise in terms of effectiveness. And, certainly the data with the cost data we have show that resmetirom, does appear to be cost effective. And perhaps that we're not capturing all of the costs that might be saved by preventing progression of disease. And I think also just to, address Donna Crier's comment about thinking about the NASH patient population really not as a monolith. And I think that's a very important point, because there's still a lot that we don't know about this patient population. And when I speak with patients, I speak in averages of what we know, but I try to convey, and I have in mind that each patient is very different.
When can I get in touch with ICER to tell them?
And and that I think we still have to move towards a more individualized approach to our patients. And I hope that will come. And I do hope that once we do have drugs to treat fatty liver, that we will learn more about who might be best served by different therapies.
Hi, I'm in my husband's room right now. So can you hear me?
Yes, Betsy, we can hear you.
Okay.
And thank you so much. We know it's you speaking, so please go ahead.
Hi. Well, you just heard from my husband, and I was his caregiver all through his liver journey. In 2005, he was told that he had a fatty liver. The doctor didn't make a big deal out of it. And my husband went every 6 months to the doctor, and he was more concerned about other medical conditions. And once in a while, he'd talk about his fatty liver. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. 2014, we get this strange phone call that says my husband has liver disease and possibly cirrhosis. Well, we didn't even believe it because, my husband was not a drinker. Fast forward to 2000, so that happened in 2014. And then the symptoms, he had some symptoms, but they were very simple, like being tired, a little bit of confusion, falling. But we assumed that all these symptoms had to do with his age and being dehydrated. And then overnight, just like a tsunami, everything changed. I had Tony in the morning for an hour and a half, and I left him. He was normal. When I came back, he didn't know his name. He didn't know where he was. He didn't know who I was. And his personality had certainly changed. I assumed that he was dehydrated. I gave him water. He slapped that out of my hand. He was saying words I never had in our 39 years of marriage heard out of his mouth. To make a long story short, I finally got him to the hospital. The doctor said I was lucky that I got him there when I did, or I could have found him in a coma, or worse yet, not alive. So immediately I quit my job. And from that point on, I never knew what Tony was going to show up. The one that I married or the one held hostage by his liver disease. I run a support group for people with NASH, liver disease. And the people in my group are younger and younger, 30s, 40s, 50s, and beyond. And many of them have children with families. And as the disease continues to progress, they need to have a parent or a family member come in and help with the household duties and help with the children. And can you imagine a child growing up in a house with a parent with this disease, never knowing if they're going to have that day the loving parent that they know, or one who is held captive by their liver disease? So I just want everyone to realize this disease does not affect one person. It affects the entire family. And it certainly takes an emotional toll on everyone. One day I would walk into the room and Tony was there smiling. He's planning a vacation for when he feels better after his liver transplant. The next day I walk into the room, Tony has tears rolling down his cheek. He's writing his obituary. Tony was lucky to receive a liver transplant. I can't say that's the case for everyone in my support group. And just last night, I was at a networking event and 3 women approached me. 2 of them had lost their husbands to liver cancer, one 7 years ago, one 4 months ago. But it struck me how similar their situations were. Neither had symptoms. They both went into the hospital for a gallbladder operation, came out with full-blown NASH. And then the 3rd woman that approached me, her brother-in-law had NASH that progressed to liver disease, and he was all set for a living transplant. However, the night before, with his final examination, they found out that his cancer had progressed to, his cancer had metastasized to other parts of his body. And so he was no longer eligible for his liver disease. So I strongly, strongly believe that if we had had medication for NASH or fatty liver, these people might be alive today. And that's just in my tiny little world here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. But I can only imagine if there had been a medication for NASH years ago, how many lives may have been saved. And I thank you for listening to me. And I'm sorry about all the confusion in the beginning. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Betsy. I'm so glad that we were able to figure the technical issue, because it's just very important to hear from the caregiver perspective, reminding us of the effect of this condition on the families and both, molecular families and larger effects. We really appreciate your input and your involvement with the community. And I think this is just a perfect kind of way to end this section before we go to our lunch break. Steve, I'll give it to you to remind us, when do we come back?
Oh, thank you, Reem. And thank you again to the people who came to give, who gave public comments. It's very helpful for the CEPAC and for all of us. So we're going to take a relatively short lunch break and reconvene at 10 minutes before the hour. That's 12:50 Central Time, 1:50 here on the East Coast. So we'll see you all back then. That's when further deliberation on the evidence and the votes will be taken before we move to the policy roundtable. So we'll see you at 10 minutes before the hour.
Sounds good.